Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. Welcome everyone. Story time today from the files of adventures in card dealing, and this is one of my favorite stories to tell. I've actually told it on the channel before, but that video posted over 4 years ago, and for the most part stopped getting views, a couple years ago. So I'm assuming the vast majority of people watching this have not heard it before. I'm sure there's some longtime viewers who will recognize it. My apologies for the duplication there. But like I said, it's one of my favorite stories to tell. It sort of has a twist in the middle that gets a little bit more bizarre as the story unfolds. And this was very early on in my card dealing, so back when I was actually tracking all my purchases. So I actually do have the financials on this deal, which I will share at the end. So it was back in 2014, and I was living in Los Angeles. And at the time, one of the ways that I would look for card deals was on Craigslist. And it was tough to find deals on Craigslist, but if you stuck with it long enough, you find a deal every once in a while. But I came across an ad, which simply, the title was something like simply large baseball card collection, and the asking price was $10,000. There was only one photo provided, which was literally just a close-up of baseball card boxes. You couldn't make out any cards in the photo, and you couldn't even get a sense for the quantity. Again, it was just like sort of a close-up of boxes, and the description had no information, so no details at all. So large baseball card collection, $10,000, no additional information provided. Now normally, I wouldn't bother following up with an ad like this. I mean, for a $10,000, someone selling $10,000 worth of anything should provide some information in a Craigslist ad, you would think. So most likely this was some sort of shadiness. But in this particular case, the seller lived only like 15 minutes from my house. So I figured, maybe it's worth following up. Worst case scenario, I waste an hour of my time driving over there and seeing a dead end and driving back. So I text the seller and actually set up a time to come look at it. I decided not to bring any cash, and normally I would, but semi-shady Craigslist ad, that's a lot of money to be showing up to. So I figured, it's in the middle of LA. There were plenty of branches of my bank within a 10-minute drive. So if we ended up working a deal, I could just run to the bank if needed. So I show up there sort of midday, and the first thing of note is the house is not a mansion, but like one step down from a mansion, a very large upscale house in like a very wealthy Beverly Hills type neighborhood. It's a woman who lets me in, and she's probably about 60 or so, and she's very friendly. And she tells me the story of what happened. Her husband had recently passed away. He had been a longtime collector, and before he died, he had told her, you should try to sell the collection to a dealer for about $10,000. He thought it was worth quite a bit more than that, but $10,000 was a fair price to be asking a dealer to pay. And she didn't have any emotional attachment to the cards. She knew nothing about them. She just kind of wanted them gone as they were, taking up a room in her house. She takes me to the cards, which are in like a second living room type room. And yeah, there they are, massive pile of cards taking up half the room. And I would estimate about 200,000 cards or so. So I tell her, I'm going to need a couple hours at least to go through them. And she says, yeah, no problem. I'll let you do your thing. And she actually leaves and goes to another part of the house while I start to look through the collection. The collection is very well organized, and maybe about 100 boxes in total or so. This picture is not the actual collection, but just to give you a sense for the quantity. And I start pulling them out, going through box, one at a time. And I would just take a box, go through it, estimate what I can pay for that box, and then quickly move on to the next box. And the collection was heavy baseball with a little bit of football, mainly from the 1990s and the 2000s. And it was, again, very well organized. There was plenty of like throwaway stuff, but there was also, kind of like a box of every notable player from the era. Like there was an entire Ken Griffey Jr. box, there was an entire Barry Bonds box, there was an entire Albert Pujols box and Ichiro, and basically a box of every notable player. There weren't really any big money cards, like nothing over $100, but there were plenty of cards in the $20 to $100 range, and there were tons and tons of dollar cards and stuff like this. So it was a fun collection to go through. There was also a lot of Red Sox stuff. He was clearly a big Boston Red Sox fan, so there was a lot of Roger Clemens cards and Nomar Garcia Parra and David Ortiz and Manny Ramirez and things like this. But after maybe 30 to 45 minutes, I was maybe a quarter of the way through the collection, and it was looking extremely promising. Like I'm going over my list, and we're not there yet, but it's definitely going in the direction where $10,000 is going to be kind of a no-brainer. So I start sort of planning in my head a little bit. Okay, I still have to get to the bank. I got to make sure I leave enough time before the banks close. But yeah, at this point I was sort of on track for that, and everything was looking great. But then the twist, or at least the start of the twist, we'll say, a second person arrives to look at the collection. Remember, this was a Craigslist ad, but the woman had not told me that another person was coming to look at the cards, so I was very caught off guard by this. She walks him into the room and tells him the same story about how her husband had passed away, and then she leaves. So it's basically just me and him in the room, and we sort of look at each other like, what are you doing here? Like, this could get awkward. But we start chatting, and we get along for the most part. He's a pretty friendly guy. He's very young. He's maybe 20 or so, I would say. But after chatting for a while, it turns out that he's really only interested in the football cards. And this would actually make things really easy, as the collection is probably 90% baseball, 10% football, something like that. And the woman had made it very clear, like, this is an all or nothing deal. Like, you can't pick and choose what you want. So you got to take the entire collection at $10,000 or best offer. So, for this part, it made sense for me to just separate the football for him and me to focus on the baseball. And we kind of agreed to this and both sort of got to work assessing the collection. So maybe an hour or so goes by, and I'm flying through boxes and assessing the collection. And I get to the point where, like, this is clearly a buy. Like, I would buy this entire collection at $10,000. If you take out the football, okay, maybe I'd buy the baseball for $9,000, whatever. Either way, I would definitely buy this collection. Negotiating the price down was sort of off the table because there were two interested buyers, and it didn't really need it. The price was clearly going to be a good price as is. But what was really weird about that hour was that, in that hour I'd assessed, I don't know, 30, 40 boxes, let's say. In that same hour, he had looked at maybe 2 boxes. I think he was literally on his second box in an hour. He was moving at just an absolute snail's pace. Now, I noticed he had spent a good bit of time just sort of looking over at me and sort of paying attention to what I was doing, and we had been making small talk for a good chunk of it. But I did so I didn't really think of anything in the moment, but it was sort of notable looking back on it. So I get up and I say, hey, I'm good. I'm ready to buy all the baseball. How are you feeling about the football? And he says, oh, do you want to buy all of it? And I said, oh yeah, I would definitely buy all of it. But I thought you wanted the football. And he said, well, actually, I think I kind of want to buy all of it. And I sort of pause, and I'm like, how can in my mind, I'm like, how can that possibly be? He's literally looked at 2 out of maybe 100 boxes, and it's not like there was a ton of value in those 2 boxes. There's no way he could have assessed this. Is he really just getting that assessment, based on watching me do it? And so I sort of ask him, I say, it's $10,000, right? And he says, yeah, I brought cash. And remember, I did not bring cash. And I say, oh, well, do you have a vehicle that can transport this? Because this would not fit in a standard car. Maybe half of it would, but not all of it. And he says, yeah, I brought a van. And he looked outside, and there was a big van out there. And I mean, he's got me, right? He's got the cash, he's got the vehicle. I don't have the cash nor the vehicle, and he's basically ready to go. I start sort of running through scenarios in my head because it just doesn't make any sense. Somebody shows up to a Craigslist ad, looks at 2 boxes out of 100, and is ready to spend $10,000 because a stranger was showing interest in it. That just doesn't make any sense, right? So the first thing I think of is maybe was hired by the woman to sort of show up, show interest, create a bidding war type of thing. He's here ready to spend $10,000. Well, I'm gonna have to beat that, and suddenly we might do this until one of us gets to a number. But that just didn't. I mean, I considered that for sure, but it didn't add up based on interacting with this guy and also having met the woman. That would have really, really surprised me. So I kind of ruled that out. I just couldn't figure out what was going on. So I kind of, as a Hail Mary, I'm like, oh, okay, you want to buy the whole thing as well? Well, why don't we split it? And that was the sort of the thing I came up with on the spot. And semi to my surprise, he goes, yeah, sure, let's do that. And this was a big sigh of relief for me because at least I'm going to get half. I mean, he could have very easily said, no, I'm going to buy the whole thing, and there would have been nothing I could have done. But at least in this case, I'm going to get half. And so I was very sort of appreciative of him in the moment. We tell the woman our plan, which is basically we're going to split the collection into halves. He's going to take his half for $5,000 and leave today. I'm going to come back the next day and with the cash to take my half for $5,000, because at that point, by the time we finished splitting up the collection, the banks were going to be closed, and she was completely fine with this. So everyone agrees to this plan. So how do you split a collection like this in half? Well, he comes up with the idea, and it's actually a very good idea and very fair, that we would make 2 boxes of equal value. So we'll take 2 boxes, move any cards around from one box to the other so that both boxes are of equal value, and then we'll just flip a coin and then put one box in his pile, 1 box in my pile, and just do this process until we did the entire thing. And yeah, this is a way where nobody can cheat, and yeah, it was a very fair process. And so I start to say, sure, I'll start making boxes, and I tell him, why don't you make boxes as well while I do that? And since we're flipping a coin, again, nobody can cheat. And he says, no, actually, I only want you to make the boxes, meaning me. And I was like, okay, I guess we can do that. So that's sort of the process that we go with. I take 2 boxes, I make sure that they're of equal value, and then he flips a coin, and he just sort of watches me sort cards for a while and flips a coin every few minutes. Sort of an awkward process, but it was getting the job done. But then we come to a box that's all Cal Ripken, and Cal Ripken was my favorite player growing up. It was a box I wanted for my personal collection. There were some Cal Ripken cards in there that I didn't have, and you know, it wasn't a particularly valuable box in relation to the collection as a whole, but it was a box I wanted for my PC, and so I say to him, hey, this is a box, this is my favorite player, do you mind if I take this box, and you can make your own box. You can pick and choose whatever you want to make your own box to sort of offset it of roughly equal value. And he sort of aggressively is like, no, absolutely not. No, definitely not. We're only doing the coin flip thing. And I was sort of caught off guard by this, and I was like, oh, you know, again, Cal Ripken was my favorite player. You know, you can take a look at the box. It's not a particularly valuable box. You can look at it, go through. There's nothing of tremendous value. It's just a box I want for my PC. Do you mind if I take this box, and you can have another box as opposed to the coin flip thing for this one example? And he says, no, absolutely not. We're only doing the coin flip thing throughout. And I say, well, you know, why do you have an issue with this? It seems like a perfectly reasonable request. And he says, well, you may know something about Cal Ripken that I don't know. And I say, like what? And he says, well, Cal Ripken, maybe he's having a really good season and all his cards are going up and they're really hot, and you're just trying to snag the best stuff. And when he said that, things just became a little more clear for me as to what was going on. And just to refresh, this was 2014. Cal Ripken retired in 2001, 13 years earlier. So, you know, he obviously wasn't having a good season. And the guy and I had small talk throughout this time. And we were mainly talking about football. So at this point, I turned to him and I say, do you know anything about baseball? And he says, I mean, no, not really. I was like, do you follow it? Have you ever followed it? And he says, no. And I say, you know, more importantly, do you know anything about baseball cards or football cards? And he says, you know, oh, I had some when I was a kid. But he didn't know anything. Like, the only brand he had ever heard of was Topps. He did not have an eBay account. He knew nobody in the industry. And so I started to sort of grill him a little bit. Like, what are you doing? Why are you buying this? This is not something you can just go buy and then sell for more. This is something you need to have expertise in the industry to know how to sell this. This isn't like a single card that's worth a whole lot of money. This is, you know, 100,000 plus cards that you're going to have to spend many, many weeks going through and expertly dividing into ways where you can maximize value. And you need to be selling on things like eBay. And I mean, you don't even have an eBay. Where are you even planning on selling this? And he didn't have an answer for any of these things. And I say again, you know, what are you doing? How can you justify spending this much money on something you know absolutely nothing about? And he said he had recently had a relative pass away. He inherited $10,000. He had been watching one of those storage unit find shows, and there had been a recent episode where somebody had found a large baseball card collection and had made a really nice return on it. So he answered this ad, showed up, saw that I was very interested in it, and just assumed that it was a good deal. But okay, I mean, that's the way it is. I was pretty annoyed in the moment. You know, he had basically just piggybacked off my knowledge and used it to take half of the collection. But you know, it is what it is, and so we did the coin flip thing on the Ripkens. What I did with the Ripken box is I actually split it into two, so I was guaranteed to get half. We flipped it, and I got one of the boxes, and he took the other. And we did that throughout the entire collection until we got all the way to the end. And I could tell after we had this conversation, as we were going along, he was kind of getting more and more like regretful that he was doing this, because he was going to take a massive amount of cards home, and he didn't know, you know, even know where to start. And so by the time we finished, I actually thought he was going to back out, and I was obviously hoping he would, but he ultimately didn't. We loaded his half into his van. I helped with that. He paid the woman $5,000 and then left. And before we left, we exchanged numbers, and I said, hey, look, if you need any help or anything, feel free to call me for any reason. And then the next day I came back with $5,000 and bought my half from the woman, and all that went smooth. And yeah, I went home with half the collection. And then within a few days after that, and it might have even been like the next day, but it was definitely within like 3 days, the guy calls me and he has massive buyer's remorse. He says he's got this massive card collection now. He has no idea what to do with it or where to start or even how to begin. And he lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with his girlfriend. And his girlfriend is like furious because the collection is taking up, you know, the entire living room and then into the bedroom. And he has no ability to even get started. So he says, do you want to come buy my half for the $5,000? And I actually decline. I say, no, I'll pass at that. However, what I will do is I'll come by and pick out some of the stuff I'd like to buy, and I'll pay you fair on that. And he accepts this because he really doesn't have any other ideas. So I come over to his place. I spend a few hours there, and again, it's a very small 1-bedroom apartment. There's cards just everywhere, and we're sort of working in this one little table in the middle of the room. And yeah, I go through everything and pull out the stuff I'm most interested in, including the half of the Cal Ripkens that I lost in the coin flip. And yeah, I spent $2,000 with him on the stuff I pulled out that I was interested in, and it was a fair offer. Like, I paid him fair for that. And yeah, left with that. And he, I never heard from him again. I don't know what happened to him or the rest of the cards after that. As I mentioned, this was very early on for me as a dealer. So early on, I tracked a lot of my large collection purchases, mainly to sort of make sure I was doing, how I was, get a sense for how I was doing, correct any mistakes I was making. So this is one I actually tracked. I spent a total of $7,000 on the collection, $5,000 for the initial half, and then $2,000 on the follow-up. And I sold everything through eBay. Back then, basically 100% of my business was sold on eBay. I wasn't doing card shows, and there wasn't really any other platform that I used or was, a legit competitor to eBay back then. So yeah, everything was sold on eBay. In month 1, I made $1,400. These are all after fees are accounted for. Month 2, $5,700. So I broke even by month 2. That's a really good result for such a large, bulky purchase. Month 3, $4,800. Month 4, $3,100. Month 5, $1,400. Month 6, $900. And then month 7, $300. Total sales or total money in after fees was $17,600, and this led to a profit of a little over $10,000. I also kept a few cards from my personal collection. I don't remember them, but certainly a bunch of the Cal Ripkens. There probably was not a lot of value there, but yeah, got to keep some nice Cal Ripkens for my collection. No idea what the time commitment I put into this. I'm going to estimate it was probably 2 weeks of full-time work. So a very nice result for me back then. But that's it for this episode of Adventures in Card Dealing. Hope you enjoyed. And like I said, I really like telling this short story. I just find the guy's actions to be very strange, silly, bizarre, interesting, infuriating, depending on your point of view. And I guess the moral of the story is don't watch reality TV shows such as Storage Wars and try to mimic their behavior without, knowing what you're doing. But eat your vegetables, and see you all again next time. Thanks, everyone.